you and your colleagues defended a series of policies for a number of years and now all of a sudden are no longer wedded to them in the same way. Like, why should they trust you on this file?
As many of you know, Steven Guilbeault has publicly endorsed Mark Carney for the next leader of the Liberal Party and therefore the next Prime Minister of Canada. He has also come out recently and stated that they could replace the carbon tax, which is very bizarre because this is the environment fanatic that stated he would resign if any other changes were made to the carbon tax after the carve-out in Atlantic Canada last year. Vassy Kapelos put the screws to him on his hypocrisy, and you will not be surprised that he did not handle that well at all.
Let's take a look.
Hi, Minister Guilbeault. Good to see you again. Thank you for making the time.
My pleasure, Vassy.
I have a number of questions on sort of the wider implications of some of the executive orders around the environment from President Trump, but I did want to start off on your endorsement of Mark Carney in the leadership race. Every single candidate is either backing off increasing the carbon tax, the consumer portion of it, or getting rid of it altogether, including your chosen candidate. Now, you sound like you'd be okay with that. All of a sudden yesterday, I was listening to your comments, and I remember doing multiple interviews with you in which you told me that politicians who cave into pressure on the carbon tax don't care about climate change. How can you now be one of them?
Great question, Vassy.
This is the problem, right? This is the problem when you have people that are either fanatics or they don't really believe in what they say, or they only believe in what they say insofar as, you know, it's going to keep them in power.
Right, they're pandering. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, for the last couple of years, it's been very clear. 70% of Canadians, some as high as 80%, if you believe some polls, have said that they do not want the carbon tax. Like, you can't fool people into think that you're getting more money back than you actually paid in. Canadians are not stupid.
Well, you can fool some people, but by and large, you are not going to fool the vast majority of Canadians who can just look at their bills and see the reality. I mean, I was speaking with one of my son's clinicians today, actually, and we had both kind of come to the same conclusion that you get to the end of the month and there's more month left than there is paycheck left.
And that's the problem, right? People are not dumb. They see it. And for the government to say, oh, well, you know, we're giving you more money. No. Doesn't work that way. Like, math does not work that way. And these are the same guys that saying, you know, these are science deniers. Science is based on math. You cannot say, well, you give me $5 and then I'll give you $6 back. It doesn't work that way.
I mean, what I've said, Vassy, is that the consumer component of our carbon pricing system is a good policy. And it's a policy that works. It is helping us reduce emissions. It is putting more money in people's pocket for the majority of Canadians where the federal system applies. But at the same time, I'm forced to recognize that largely due to Pierre Poilievre's campaign to frankly lie and misguide Canadians, it has become very unpopular. And what I've also said is that our climate plan doesn't rest on one single measure. There's about 100 measures that we've put out the door in the last few years that are helping us reduce our pollution like never before in the history of the country. In fact, we've never seen our pollution levels go down while the economy is going up.
Okay, so a couple of things there. We're not going to let you get away with this crap even on your way out, Steven Guilbeault. So, number one, he says, oh, well, you know, Canadians have just believed the lie of Pierre Poilievre in that it's really 80% of Canadians get more money back than they actually give out. Well, the problem is 9 months ago, he was on with Vassy Kapelos and he was still trying to put out this same trope. But the thing is Vassy Kapelos stated what the parliamentary budget officer said then and what he said just this past fall, where he said, listen, if you just look at fuel, sure, that's what it is. But when you look at the broader economic impact, when you look at what the cost of fuel is doing to the increase in cost of trucking and transportation and heating and all of this other stuff, 60% of Canadians are worse off because of the carbon tax. And then Steven Guilbeault comes back and says, oh, well, but the thing is he doesn't take into account the cost of climate change. He doesn't take into account all of these investments that will end up benefiting Canadians down the road. It's going to be an over time thing, but that's going to happen. So he even unintentionally admits back then that it's a trope and that it's a lie, and Canadians just have to wait until they actually realize the benefits of the carbon tax.
Well, and that's exactly it. The Liberals are looking at the direct cost of the carbon tax. They're looking at your home heating bill and going, okay, you're being charged an extra $40 this month for your heating, energy, etc. with the carbon tax, and we're going to give you that money back plus a little extra. But what they're not looking at is the indirect costs, which nobody can calculate. And you see this in message boards like Reddit all the time, where you get these people on the left coming in and arguing, well, I only paid $20 on my carbon tax, on my heating bill, and I got $250 back. So, I'm making it out ahead, blah, blah, blah. You're not looking at the whole picture. You're not looking at how much are you paying at the grocery store? You hear the Liberals again saying, oh, well, it's greedy CEOs at the grocery store that are making your groceries so expensive. No, it's not. They have not raised their profit margins. And we've discussed this in the past, and we have the evidence from Loblaw's, their profit and loss sheets that will show you that no, we've maintained our 4 to 6% profit margin over the past, I don't even know how many years. It was a long time. But prices are going up because of the carbon tax. They have to pay extra to heat the facilities where your food is being sold. So the grocery store, they also have to pay to heat the warehouses. They have to pay extra to have the food shipped from the warehouses to the grocery stores. Like, all these factors are going into the price of your food, and that's why it's going up so much.
Well, and let's not forget inflation. Inflation has raised the price of everything. So while the actual money dollars profit has increased for the grocery stores, the percentage problem hasn't. And that's because as inflation goes up, our currency value goes down. And this is what they don't want to talk about. They know damn well what it is, but they just don't want to talk about the truth because they want somebody else to blame.
Happened before. And I mean, of course, I would like for the consumer component of pricing to continue moving forward, but the reality is that it's not supported by the NDP. Even some environmental organizations are telling me, listen, Minister, it's too unpopular. And we have other tools. Well, I mean, we obviously have the industrial component of carbon pricing, which gives us about 3 times more pollution reduction than the consumer one. So we have other tools at our disposals to continue fighting climate change. And Mr. Carney's been very clear. He said, if we want to remove something from the equation in terms of fighting for climate change, we have to be able to put something else or use other tools that we have and beef them up to make sure that in the end, we're not losing ground on fighting climate change in Canada.
When you increase the cost of industry, you increase the cost to the consumer.
Right, and not only that, but you're going to drive industry out of Canada. These environmental fanatics are the ones that are driving our jobs straight down to the US, because these manufacturers know, well, if we build it down in the US, we can use US jobs and we don't have to pay a carbon tax on what we're manufacturing.
And I guess, though, it's confusing to me because I remember putting that exact point to you again on multiple occasions, that there were progressive allies of yours who were saying that there were replacements, other tools that could replace the consumer carbon tax. I'll read you exactly what you told me 9 months ago. If there's a measure somewhere that someone can find and point to me that will help us achieve 10% of 2030 targets at no extra cost to consumers lying around under a rock somewhere, someone needs to show it to me because I haven't seen it. Have you seen it now? Because I don't understand what's changed in the interim other than Justin Trudeau leaving.
As I said, I mean, the fact that the leadership candidates have said that they wanted to reconsider the consumer portion of carbon pricing. I mean, I basically have two choices here. I can stay in the party and continue help fighting to protect the environment, fighting climate change, or go pick my bags and go home. And I don't think that's a very viable option for me, especially with the threat of a possible Poilievre election who doesn't even recognize the threat of climate change, who, like Donald Trump, would probably pull us out of the Paris agreements. So my team and I are looking at, okay, well, if we don't have the fuel charge anymore, what else can we do to compensate? And there are possibilities, and Mark Carney has said exactly that. Like if we want to remove something from the equation in terms of our arsenal to fight climate change, then we have to come up with a new measure or use some of the existing measures, but maybe tighten them up a little bit so that they give us more bang for our bucks.
I like how quickly they threw up that lower thirds. I have to pack my bags or stay.
And if you're wondering what she means by lower thirds is it's that ticker, that
quote,
text ticker right underneath them.
Like pretty much as soon as they said it, whoever was sitting there at the computer typed it up and threw it up there.
You said, "Oh, that's a good one." Yeah,
it was a good one.
But you know, this is the problem with these liberals. If it's not Guilbeault, it's Mark Miller, it's Mark Holland, it's Chrystia Freeland, it's Mark Carney, it's all of them. It's all of them. They would just want you to forget that any past interviews that they've done don't exist.
Well, this is the problem with fanatics in general, is that they have their goal in mind, and no matter how much evidence, how much proof, how much even anecdotal evidence you show them, it's not good enough. This is the only thing that we can do. This goal is the only thing that we can do.
Well, and we see this not just with the environment, we see this in politics as well. It's an ideology.
Yeah.
When you will not accept an alternate opinion, you are married to that ideology. When you will not accept facts, you are married to that ideology. Ladies and gentlemen, that's dangerous, because what that means is you are not thinking for yourself. You are allowing someone else to think for you.
It's almost like being in a cult.
It is. It is.
It really is. It's like that cult mentality. They've got to go through like deprogramming to get that idea out of their head.
Like we've said many times, we don't agree with everything that the Conservatives are doing, but we agree with the majority of it.
Well, we agree with enough that we want to support them. We want to support that vision for our country.
Right. And when all you're doing is repeating the talking points that are given to you, you're not thinking. That's you being programmed. But let's go back 9 months to some of the things that Steven Guilbeault did say, just so we can see the difference as to what he's saying now.
But at this point in time, given the affordability struggles, like you highlight many of those using home heating oil are facing, would it not be worth considering pressing pause in this instance?
No, it wouldn't, because we can't put a pause on climate change. And what Pierre Poilievre never talks about is the fact that people right now, 8 out of 10 Canadians, families, get more money back than they pay in carbon pricing. So the richest among us don't, the people who pollute the most, but 8 out of 10 Canadian families, and that has been confirmed by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. So if we were to do that, we would actually hurt people economically while they're struggling. It wouldn't help them at all.
So let's just unpack that statement for a moment, because when the Parliamentary Budget Officer considered the in and out, exactly what you're referring to, he did determine that when you take just the direct input of the carbon tax and the value of the rebate, more Canadians are better off. But when you add on the economic impact, so for example, the impact on investment income and overall on economic growth, slightly more Canadians, he determined, were worse off. Add to that, Minister, the fact that you have about $2.5 billion, only $100 million of which has been allocated that was supposed to be set aside for those who are disproportionately impacted by the carbon price, so farmers, small business owners, and Indigenous people, and you have yet all these years in to disperse that money. Is it fair to truly say more Canadians are better off?
Absolutely, it is. The parliamentary budget officer, and he did some interviews this week, is the first one to recognize that this analysis is a partial analysis. It doesn't take into account the economic benefits of growing renewable and clean tech industry and the investments that we're doing in electrification of transportation, which will have very beneficial economic impacts to Canadians. It will come over time in the coming years. The parliamentary budget officer is the first one to recognize that his analysis doesn't take into consideration the cost to Canadians of climate change. And in terms of farmers, we've returned more than $1 billion of federal investment to help farmers reduce their carbon footprint, to reduce their pollution in the last 2 years. There is a portion of the money that we still have to return for small and medium-sized businesses and to Indigenous communities, and we're working to do that. And this will happen in the coming months.
Guess what didn't happen in the coming months? You don't have to guess. And we know businesses that went under because they didn't get it.
Yeah.
This is the problem. And you hear him, right? He's trying to dance all over the place. And the big thing that he doesn't seem to understand, that he kind of lets slip there, is that, okay, so the carbon tax is supposed to mostly get returned to Canadians, 90% of it. But then he says, but, there's all these green tech investments that we're making and all this. Well, wait a minute.
They're not making green tech investments.
But even if they are.
But they're not. If they were, they would be building nuclear plants like yesterday. Nuclear is the greenest and the second safest mode of energy production that we have behind solar.
Even if they are. I'll take him at his word. Fine, you are. Where's that money coming from? Because allegedly it's not coming from the carbon tax. So if it's not coming from the carbon tax, what the hell's the point of the carbon tax? This is the problem.
Oh, it's to make Canadians alter their habits and blah, blah, blah. I mean, meanwhile, we've got a government paying something like $1 billion a week of our tax money because they've overblown the budget for the last 9 years. They've doubled our deficit and since like any other prime minister combined. In the last 9 years, they created more debt than all the other prime ministers before them. And we are paying $1 billion a week nearly to service this debt. What could $1 billion a week buy Canadians? How many nuclear facilities do you think it could buy Canadians? How many hospitals?
How many plane tickets for Guilbeault to leave the country?
We only need one.
Right? So that's a bargain. Anyway, let's go back to present day.
And I guess it's on behalf of Canadians who are watching, who are incredibly concerned, as I know you are, about the impacts of climate change, that I ask, are you so sure the Liberal Party will continue to be best positioned? And not vis-a-vis the Conservatives, who, you're right, have detailed nothing and deserve hard questions about that. But just in general, I'm thinking of other things that you have put on the table that you have recently walked back, including, for example, a net zero electricity grid, which was supposed to be 2035 and is now 2050. Jonathan Wilkinson, the energy minister, a few weeks ago told me that if he were still running for leader, he would have, rethought the emissions cap, for goodness sakes. I don't even know if the candidates are wedded to the emissions cap on oil and gas anymore. Can you really look at Canadians who are concerned, deeply concerned about the climate crisis and say the Liberal Party is going to reach the targets that the government has set out? Because nobody is detailing how they're going to do that, and they're abandoning the stuff you've put in place.
Well, I beg to differ on the clean electricity regulations, because we never assumed that those regulations would enable the Canadian grid to be carbon neutral by 2035, because the regulations only enter into force in 2035. So we're giving public utilities, electricity companies across the country 10 years to prepare for the entry into force of those regulations. So it's impossible if the regulations comes in place in 2035 that we would go from a grid that is emitting to a grid that is carbon neutral the same year. That's just physically impossible. So we're not backing down on that. In fact, although not a lot of people are talking about it, the clean electricity regulation is one of the most material things we've done to tackle emissions in this country. It is millions of tons of CO2 that will never make it to the atmosphere because of those regulations. It means a cleaner grid. It means a grid also that will become more affordable over time for Canadians. And it means jobs all across the country in the renewable energy sector. In terms of the cap on oil and gas emissions, I mean, I continue to believe that it is a good piece of policy, and that for a number of reasons. I mean, every sector should do their fair share when it comes to reducing their pollution, and certainly the oil and gas sector should do that as well. And I have spoken with Mark Carney about that, and he shares my belief on that.
I just want to give props to whoever's handling the lower thirds today for CTV, because that just the way that they are using the quotes that he's saying in this interview and immediately putting them up on the screen for all of us to laugh at is just mwah, chef's kiss.
Well, their audio team, you get an F. Their lower thirds team, you get an A.
Hopefully it's not the same guy.
But this is the thing. Like, listen to now the rewriting of history, right? It's like, oh, well, you know, the planet is going to die. Everyone is going to be burning up, and we have to do something by 2030, or we're screwed. And everything has to be net zero by 2035. That's where all of our targets are, and blah 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 blah. And now all of a sudden, well, you know, we didn't actually promise that, and, you know, that wasn't realistic.
But again, why are they not looking at nuclear as a viable option? Canada has the best and safest reactors in the world, and we have some of the most talented people working in those reactors. Why are we not building more of them?
Well, and everyone will be happy to know that Bruce Power is actually looking to build the largest nuclear power plant in the world, and it's going to put out somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,100 megawatts of electricity. So they're adding another few reactors to their existing station, and it's going to be the most powerful in the world. And
why are we not doing more of that, though? I mean, Ontario, and I think there's one in Quebec, they're the only provinces in this country that have nuclear stations. Why are they not everywhere?
Well, and this is what Pierre wants to do, right? He wants to look at the small form reactors and deploy them en masse across Canada. But, you know, we digress. But this comes back to Vassy's question. Like, so it seems that the Liberals are abandoning their hard stance on the environment now, because they're walking everything back. Everything that they told Canadians was based in science. It was based in fact. You must do this. This is the only way.
Because they saw what it did to them in the polls. That's why.
Yeah, 100%. And if you don't do this, then you're a climate hypocrite. You're a climate denier and all this crap. Okay, so if we took them at their word last year, then they're climate deniers. They don't believe in climate change. They don't believe in science. And Canadians shouldn't trust them.
Well, how can you trust somebody who flip-flops like this? Either you were lying 6 months ago or you're lying now. Either way, that's not somebody I want to vote for.
And the one thing that he said at the end, he said about the carbon price, I've talked to Mark Carney about this, and he agrees with me.
Right. So maybe they'll get rid of the consumer carbon tax when Mark Carney is leader, if he becomes leader. But it sounds like they're going to be bringing something else in.
Well, and it sounds like they're going to be getting you in some other way. Because let's now flip it around and say, okay, the carbon tax was funding green energy and green projects. That means they need money from us in order to do that.
But I thought we got more money back.
Well, and this is the thing. And what about the $200 million that it costs that public servants are being paid to administrate the carbon tax? Got to fire all them, right? Or maybe not. This is the problem. And this is where all these questions are coming to Mark Carney. Because the minute you have somebody like Steven Guilbeault endorsing you, all kinds of questions demand to be asked.
So we are committed to continue moving forward with that.
But that's Mark Carney. I don't know where, nobody else has come out and said anything. And I have the energy minister who on multiple occasions came on this program to defend that cap, now all of a sudden saying there could be other tools. I think, again, I'm coming at it from perspective of people who are worried about climate, who you and your colleagues defended a series of policies for a number of years and now all of a sudden are no longer wedded to them in the same way. Why should they trust you on this file?
Well, because we're the first government in the history of Canada who've taken climate change seriously. We're the first government in the history of Canada that has deployed a credible plan to fight our climate pollution. And we're the first government in the history of Canada that have results to show for it. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. And I'm sorry, Vassy, I often watch your shows. I missed it when Minister Wilkinson was there. I was talking with him yesterday about the emissions cap for the oil and gas sector. And what he told me is that he's still on board with moving forward with that regulation.
Maybe because he decided not to run. It was a few days before he had made that decision.
So, very pointed question. Why should Canadians trust you? And his response is, well, we're the first government that's put together a credible plan. The plan that everybody is walking back.
That credible plan.
Really? Really? So it obviously wasn't too credible if you're walking it back then, is it?
Oh, the only reason we're walking it back is because Canadians don't like it. They don't know what's good for them, blah, 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 right?
Well, and this is it, right? Well, it's deeply unpopular. And the other thing that he said earlier in the interview that I want to come back to is when he said, well, I have a choice. I could pack my bags and leave.
Yes, do that.
Or I could, stay and continue to fight for climate change. Well, you had that choice earlier, but you said, if one more thing is going to happen to the carbon tax, then I'm out of here. I'm out of here.
But, ultimately, that decision is not up to him. It's up to the constituents of his riding.
Well, and this is what it comes down to, folks. So the one party, that has been consistent on their stance on all of this stuff for the last 2 to 3 years is the Conservatives. They've said the exact same thing over and over and over again, to the point where the Liberals are now trying to do exactly what the Conservatives have committed to doing. So who are you going to trust? The one that has steadfastly said the exact same thing for 3 years straight, or the one that has demonized you, insulted you, divided you, told you were crazy, and told you to trust the science for the last 10 years? And then a couple months before an election, they say, you know what, you were right. Really?